Hello there, welcome to the second devlog of Atlas Oceanus. Now, before we begin, I should probably address the lack of videos over the past month and a half, which is simply due to me getting sidetracked with developing the game. Now, with that out of the way, let's get into the devlog. So, first of all, we now have a placeholder main menu, which the quit button works. The settings button at the moment is still a placeholder because there's nothing really to go into the settings page itself yet. And then when we hit play, we go into the game. We also have a pause menu, which actually pauses the game. As you can see, the character is mid jump. The save and quit button doesn't actually save the game quite yet. It just quits. I still need to sort out the whole save file stuff. Back to the main menu, takes you back to the main menu. Pretty self-explanatory. Settings, again, just a placeholder. And then resume, obviously, resumes the game. So, first of all, we have the Lighthouse, which I did show and explain more of in my previous short. But now we have some working ladders, which you can now climb up, which takes you all the way to the top and gives you a nice view of the starter island so far, with each separate areas, some finished landscape textures such as the grass, the dirt and the sand. So yeah, now let's get into each of the areas. So first of all, obviously we have the lighthouse, which serves as the player's hub where they can get upgrades and whatnot. This here is the player's personal dock, which is unlockable during the game. Now if we go down here, we have some shops. So these shops here and these shops here will be facing the ocean, as that makes them feel more open and inviting. And these shops would be facing these houses here. Then if we go up here, we have a little woodland area along with a fountain, which will have a purpose later on in the game, which I won't tell you about now because I don't want to spoil you with spoilers of the game. Obviously over here is where all the houses are, where obviously people on the island would live. And then we have another little woodland area over here, which is just trees at the moment. And then up here we have a old fort, which at the moment is still in the block out phase. Well, no, actually it's finished the block out phase now. I need to start modeling it, modeling the walls and the stairs and whatnot, as well as the cannons, which will be on top of the wall. The cannons on the wall, one of which will have a certain mechanic which will allow the player to shoot the cannon. And I was thinking of making the cannon shoot at an old oil rig, which would then cause it to sort of crumble and collapse under the water. And then when you go over there to clean up the ocean, when you clean it up, the coral would sort of grow over the top of the ruined oil rig that the player shot with the cannon. I got this idea from this article by Sasha Fernando, in which it details old oil rigs being used to create artificial reefs where things like coral would grow on them and fish would live obviously in the coral as they do in real life. And then last but not least for the island, we have this dock area, which will serve as the tutorial area, as it's a nice enclosed area and whatnot. And these also have some working ladders. So now, as you may have noticed, I have changed the underwater post-processing from a flat sort of colour to this more sort of fog-like effect, as the previous block colour messed with the coloration of the things I would put under the water. So for example, the pink fish wouldn't look pink. We also have this sand texture, which makes it easier for the player to know, to visually see that they're actually moving under the water, which is quite important. Over in the corner, we have a working oxygen meter, which when obviously it runs out, the player will respawn over at the lighthouse. The taskbar at the bottom is just a placeholder for now. When I begin, which will change when I begin to implement the various cleaning tools. And then just past this sort of sandbank cliff here will be the first coral reef area. At the moment it's still sort of bland, but I will be able to quickly add in all the rocks and the coral to make it look like a good coral reef. So as you can see with these rocks, there is this sort of mossy colour on top, which I done via triplanar mapping, which is essentially it keeps one colour on top of the rock. And I've got one for the green, which is which I used for like the island, which I used for the mossy rocks of the island. And then we have these sort of brown ones here, which have sand on top, which will be the main ones to go obviously under the water, where the coral reefs would go and where the coral would grow on top of. So for example, with the triplanar mapping, it always keeps the sand texture on top. Same with the mossy green rock. And this just gives the rocks a bit more variation for when I begin to place them around the world. Lastly, I have begun development of the core mechanic of the game, which is the cleaning. So over here you see some dulled out coral. These white cubes right here are just placeholders for now, for when the final assets are done. Then when you clean them, you can see firstly the coral doesn't look as dull, and then there are also other coral which grow, and then when you finish cleaning them up, the coral is fully grown and they no longer look dull. The next steps of this cleaning mechanic would be obviously implementing the tools, and to make it so that the tools would face wherever the player puts the camera. So for example, if I put the camera that way, the tool would face that way, and then the player would use the tool to clean up the trash and not just stand there and click with nothing. So what I plan to do next is basically a massive focus on the mechanics side of the game, as I plan to add in a day-night cycle to sort of improve the lighting and make the game more immersive and feel more alive, as well as polishing up the cleaning mechanics, which I just mentioned. I would also like to implement a functioning tutorial so that when I get people to start playtesting the game, the tutorial is there to sort of teach them how the game works, so I don't have to backseat game them, which can get quite annoying. I would also like to get a functional version of the fish schooling from the previous devlog, which I have just been unable to work on since then, as I've been massively focusing on the more art side of the game. I also plan to get the island fully done with all the buildings, the fort, the foliage, such as the trees, the grass, and maybe some bushes to make the island feel properly alive. I also plan to start developing the underwater stuff. So start developing the coral reef area, as well as this sandbank area, which will have bits of seaweed, which will get more lively as obviously the player cleans up the ocean. I also want to have a massive focus on getting some audio into the game, such as like sound effects, some background music, just to add a bit of life to the game, as at the moment it's just a silent game. And so adding some audio will just make it feel a bit more immersive and give the mechanics a bit more impact to them. And lastly, I plan to implement the character model, which should hopefully be done by the end of the week, as I'm currently halfway through the sculpting phase. And once that's done, I just need to finish putting on the head, the hands, and the feet. And then I can rig and texture it. And then I can put that into the game, which will then also fix the deformed swimming animations, as mentioned in my previous devlog. But yeah, that's about it. If you liked what you see, please leave a like. And if you want to keep up to date with the development of Atlas Oceanus, please subscribe. Links to all the sources used are in the description, along with a timestamp of when they were used. Check out my previous devlog if you haven't already seen it. But yeah, that's about it. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.